Good. All right, welcome back for this special edition of Beat the Count. It's special for many reasons. So I'm going to start by saying it is our 60th episode of Beat the Count. Did you know that?
60 episodes already. Wow.
This is our anniversary, and you didn't even know. You didn't bring me anything.
I know. I should have like some chocolates and flowers waiting for me or something, Sean.
I know.
Come on, bro.
My bad, man.
It's all good.
Okay, I'll start with my immediate left co-host. I promoted you back to co-host a few episodes ago.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that, man.
Lead writer for Supreme Boxing, Anthony Stacks Saldana. Welcome back, bro.
Man, glad to be back. Nice new little setup we have here today.
I know. I actually invited you into my home for the first time in like a year.
Right?
For sure, man. Welcome aboard. Appreciate you. And, of course, to my far left, we have today's special guest, Dr. Nathan Lavid. I got that right?
You did indeed.
I nailed it. But I'll leave it to you to describe what your doctorate is in. What type of doctor are you?
Oh, sure. I'm a medical doctor, and I'm a clinical and forensic psychiatrist. And one of the reasons I'm here, and again, thank you guys for having me. It's much appreciated. Is that I've written a book about amateur boxing and the mental aspects associated with it, and it's based on my experience. Being a psychiatrist, because I deal with emotions. And also when I was in medical school and in my internship and residency, when I was doing general medicine, I was a ringside physician for USA Boxing. And I would also shadow some doctors who were involved in pro boxing. And then last, and this is the genesis of the book, is when I was a kid, I was an amateur boxer, and not that good of one. And then I got back into boxing in my 40s when I was made aware of masters boxing, and it was brought upon when I was bringing my two young boys to a boxing gym in Long Beach, and one of the owners and operators of the boxing gym, Doug McKinnon, made me aware of masters boxing because he was signed up for a show, and I had never heard of it. So I signed up, and I got back into the boxing game, and I've really enjoyed it. And,
so you still compete in Masters?
I do. I'm signed up. I haven't had a bout in some time. They're sort of hard. I mean, because, I'm working.
Yeah, of course.
To get the time to do it. But, I still go to the gym. I spar. It's a lot of fun.
So you say that as a young man you were into boxing. So how young is that about?
Oh, man, I started very young. I started when I was 6 years old.
6 years old boxing?
Yeah,
okay.
I went to the Y in Buffalo, New York. And the reason I went there that young is because they thought it'd be good exercise for me because I was diagnosed with ADD. And
okay.
Actually, the pediatrician recommended that I go get involved in sports, and he recommended boxing. So actually, I was brought to the boxing gym not by my dad, but by my mom.
Oh, okay.
And then I did that for a little bit, and then I didn't really like doing sit-ups. I got involved in other sports.
It's a good workout, right?
It is. It's a tough workout. So it's not a game. And then I, because I had some experience when I was a little kid, and then I started boxing again when I was in college, and I actually boxed when I was in med school as an amateur.
Okay.
And then, I didn't really do that well then, but it was a good experience. It was fun.
Where'd you go to med school at?
Kansas, University of Kansas.
Nice.
And, of course, you mentioned the book, so I'd like to mention it as well. I'll also put a link to it in the description when we post this later so that anybody who wants to, the book is available on Amazon, Amateur Boxing, Mental Stress, and Strength. And so can you talk to, I know you mentioned that this is something that you brought your kids to participate in boxing. And is that the motivation behind the book, or is it, what inspired you to sort of take this approach?
Well, actually, I had no really thought that I'd write a book on boxing. I'd get back into boxing in my 40s. But, people kept on coming to me knowing I was a psychiatrist. Well, what do you do to get ready? And, you should write a book about this. And I gave it some thought. And, God, what I do to get ready is sort of odd. But what I can provide the people is sort of an understanding of the emotions you go through. And I can give the science behind that. And that will be informative. And because I know what's going on. And that's helpful for me. So I don't get too, so to speak, concerned about it because I know it's normal.
So some of the emotions that you describe in your book, you give them terms anticipatory anxiety and fear. And these are things that at different points of training and competition, you experience these. For a layperson like myself, you probably just experience those as some kind of discomfort, but there's actually a big distinction between them. And you've also said that to some extent, fear is an important component of training. Can you describe what you mean by that?
Sure. Fear is important. And I know this being a psychiatrist because fear is normal, and you learn this in medical school. And I didn't know this when I was boxing as a kid, but I understood it because I could feel it. But fear allows you to be ready. If you're not scared, you're not ready, because fear gives you that adrenaline. It makes you aware, your eyes are open, you're ready to go. And if you're not experiencing that, you're not going to do well, because, in essence, boxing's a fight.
So you're actually talking about, if I can clarify, there are biological factors that take place in your body when you are afraid. So when there's proximate danger, right, I have essentially heightened senses, is that fair to say, that would benefit me in the course of a boxing match?
Yeah, that's nature. The fight or flight response is a description of fear. And if you don't have that, you're not going to be ready, because you're not as aware as you should be. You can't go into a boxing match, you have to be calm, and we could go into that, but you have to be ready. And you have to, realize, hey, this is a fight.
Is it, so obviously you and I talked a little bit about this beforehand, but when you ask a professional boxer, for instance, are you afraid, right? Are you afraid of your opponent? Of course, there's a certain level of machismo that's involved where nobody would ever admit, for instance, that they are afraid of an opponent, afraid of taking a loss. Biologically speaking, is it the case that people are not afraid if they're wired correctly, like the rest of us? Is that just something that they're saying?
No, you have a great point. And, I think especially professional boxers, because there's marketing involved, and I think it's something that's assumed. If you're a spectator, well, heck, these guys are going in there and they're giving it their all. They can't have any fear. And, it's even mentioned by boxers when they're doing this. But when they retire, they tell you about it. Yeah, I was scared. Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, and Rocky Marciano, and I mentioned this before the show, has a great quote about fear. When he was boxing, I think there was a quote, they maybe sold this, he was afraid of no man, and, he endorsed that. But when he retired, he said, well, yeah, I had fear, but I kept it behind me. I used it, because if I didn't do that and I wasn't prepared, it would pop in front of me and I was finished. And so fear is something that's one of the benefits of boxing, and an aspect that I address in the book. You have to learn how to control it. And that's an appeal of boxing.
It's funny that you say that, as far as like learning to control your fear. And in one aspect, you're saying, yeah, it can help you, but then you said, okay, you got to learn how to control it. And that, that kind of goes back to something that was said over this past, say 2 weeks ago, where they were saying that Anthony Joshua, the heavyweight champion, who just lost his titles, it was rumors saying that he basically had a panic attack before the fight. Like, he was just maybe too scared, He said he didn't, but there were those rumors there. So, as far as like you say, controlling your fears, I guess you have to find that, that happy space in between where you're not too afraid to fight, but you still have that fear, that
healthy fear.
Yeah, healthy fear.
I think Marciano puts it really well. You use it, you keep it behind you, because if it pops in front of you, you're done.
Also, if you've ever watched Rocky V, Frankie Fear. You don't remember that part when he's talking to Tommy Gunn?
Yeah.
Fear is your best friend.
Exactly.
So Rocky got something right, just so you guys know. Sylvester Stallone knows what he's talking about. I knew it. I always knew it. That's why I watch all his movies. I'm going to watch the new Rambo.
But you could be overwhelmed by fear.
Sure.
And that's not to your benefit.
Yeah. Of course. And actually, one of the things I mentioned about your book that I think may not be the most logical thing to understand is in a section where you describe confidence. And you say something very similar about confidence. There's an appropriate amount of confidence. So I believe the way that you describe it is too little or too much could be hazardous.
Yes.
There's an appropriate level of confidence. And too much confidence, actually I have a quote. Let me see. So it says, the right amount of confidence will come to you when you stay focused on your preparation and give no mind to the result. Now, the result that you're talking about in this context is winning, right? You're saying don't think about winning so much or losing. Focus on your preparation. And you give examples of how people think about winning, and it's mostly because their family and friends tell them they're going to win all the time, right? They're constantly telling them, you're going to win this fight, you're going to win this fight. Can you explain how that is hazardous and what are the types of things that we should focus on instead?
Oh, yeah. You have to focus on what you're going to do. And that's sort of the boxing strategy when you're with your coach, especially in amateur boxing where you don't know your opponent. I mean, that's different than professional boxing where the matchmaking is sort of set. In amateur boxing, you can have, a pre-bout match. But, I mean, usually the case, you're into boxing somebody else. Or if you're in a tournament, it's going to progress, based on winning through the tournament. So you really don't get to know that person. And the only time you get to see them is when you're warming up, maybe like 5-10 minutes before. So it's real important for you to focus with your coach. Well, hey, maybe this guy's a southpaw. I got to use right hands. Focus on these things. It's real easy to focus on the win if you're feeling scared because it helps alleviate it and your family's there telling you you're going to win and stuff like that. But you can't do that. You have to really focus on what's going to allow you to perform well. That's listening to your coach and being calm. When you start focusing on these other things, looking at the trophy, you think you're going to get, or a belt you think you're going to get, it's distracting. And it's not going to help you in the ring. It's going to actually prevent you from getting that trophy. And
the same thing for the inverse, right? So if I focus too much on loss, of course, that can't be good for me either, I imagine.
Exactly. And if you get downtrodden, you look at the guy, one of the things when you have, these shows, you look at the guy, God, that guy's in shape, dang.
Yeah.
I drew a tough dude. But, I mean, if you're boxing him, at least in amateur boxing, he's going to have the same competence as you. He's going to have the same win-loss record as you. You're going to do fine. And you can't focus and get discouraged. And you need confidence to get you to a state where you can go in there and you're not, impaired by fear or nervousness.
Thanks to those of you just joining us. We're here with Dr. Nathan Lavid, who's talking to us about his book, Amateur Boxing, Mental Stress and Strength. And we're talking about fear. And one of the other components that we didn't mention is this concept of anticipatory anxiety, which is, well, maybe I should let you describe it.
Oh, sure.
What is anticipatory anxiety, and when would a boxer experience that?
Yeah, it's simply the nervousness or anxiety you have before your bout. And it's something that progressively increases until you actually, step into the ring. It sort of varies when it ends, but it clearly ends when you're boxing. But this is sort of nature's way to make you prepared. It allows you to have sort of the inward motivation to the force that's going to allow you to go to the gym when you don't want to go to the gym. Go in the morning, run, do these things because you're worried about, I'm in 3 weeks, I'm going to be in the ring by myself with this guy. And that anxiety is helpful for allowing you to be prepared. And we refer to it from a medical standpoint as anticipatory anxiety. And it escalates as you go. And it's helpful, but it could be detrimental if it gets too much.
And I think a lot of what and maybe this, you can elaborate more on this, but I feel like as you go through those stages of anticipatory anxiety in the book, which you actually step through kind of breaking it down by periods of your training camp, like your 6-week version, your 3-week version, and so forth and so on. A lot of remedying this is physical preparation, or the idea that you are preparing yourself in the appropriate way. Is that fair to say?
Exactly. You do the right things, so you'll do the right things in the ring. And one of the things I address in the book too is the preparation that boxers actually use. And with this experience, boxing, you have to repeat things, and you do simple things over and over again. When you see really good people, like you see some pros in the gym, they're doing the same simple stuff, but they do it correctly.
It becomes second nature. It seems like a lot of muscle memory.
Yeah.
They show. The jab techniques, the different techniques, it all they become creatures of habit.
Exactly.
And the brain takes over. Sometimes they don't even have to think. They see it and they can.
Oh, that's a great point, because if you're a good boxer, you box smart, and it's something I address in the book too. In order to box smart, you have to make these things. You mentioned muscle memory, but it's real brain memory. You have to make these things automatic, unconscious. Sort of like when you were driving here today, you weren't thinking too much about, lining up, your car in the middle of the lane. You've done it so many times, it's automatic. Boxers have to make these same skills automatic. And the way they do it, they repeat it over and over again. They get, coaching. It's real interesting to see the really good people who are preparing to box, at a high amateur stage or professional stage. They do things really methodical. And they do it over and over again, and they work really hard too.
How big is sports psychology for you in boxing? I know that in other sports, such as baseball, golf and whatnot. Sports psychology is starting to take over where, these athletes are actually going out and seeing psychologists to get them mentally ready. Do you think that's going to start having a bigger effect in boxing?
To some degree. Boxing is a little different sport, though, because you hit it on it first. If you really want to be prepared, you do the right things beforehand. I mean, boxing's been around for thousands of years. You need to learn the correct skills and strategy to do well. And that's going to help alleviate some of that anxiety. But then, there's a second component that, that's used in other sports, like golf, for example, is famous for people having these sort of psychological yips, I think they refer to, when they just, they've been playing golf their whole life, but they just don't have it together because they have these other things that are interfering. And I think that can have a place in boxing because it's based on the individual. And those are the people that see sports psychologists and even psychiatrists. They focus on the person, sort of like a doctor caring for a patient. You hear their history and you look, well, hey, what is disrupting this thing? Because you've been practicing so long. Yeah. And they address it that way. So I think in boxing, it has a role, but it's very individualized.
Yeah, I remember in baseball, it became big, I'd say 12 to 15 years ago. Chuck Knobloch, he was the second baseman of the Yankees. Everything's routine, but then during the World Series, he couldn't throw the ball to first base to save his life, and it just couldn't get the ball there, and then he's seen a psychologist afterwards, and I know in boxing, a big thing of it, it's not necessarily, yes, you have to have the skill, you have to be in the best physical shape possible to get in that ring, but a lot of it is mental. We've talked about this the last couple of weeks as well, being mentally prepared when you get into that ring, so I just think it's it's like a big puzzle where you have to have all the pieces together.
Yeah, top-notch boxers are really smart because you're in a milieu that's violent, and they got to think things through. Like I haven't experienced as an amateur boxer, and I know enough about the sport to really appreciate good boxers. Like, for example, Terence Crawford, when you watch him box, he doesn't do anything the first couple rounds. He's figuring the guy out, and then he does exactly what he needs to do to win. It's just sort of amazing to watch that guy. Because he has a skill set to do that, but he has to sort of figure it out. And the really good people are able to figure it out in a really violent, environment.
So we have a question from Jesse Padilla, which is, how about fighters that are amazing in the gym sparring, but are not able to in a real fight?
Oh man, that's where sort of the individual aspect, because they obviously know what they need to do if they can spar. Yeah, and that that's, you have to really address that on an individual basis. Maybe they're overwhelmed with something in their life. I remember speaking with, he was an MMA fighter, and he was just talking about one time, he had some family issues, and his mind was in the right place, and it was over quickly. That person, the answer to that question, there might be some other issues that are interfering with his, innate ability to do what he should be doing and what he's been taught.
Yeah.
It's a little bit different with you as well, because besides just being a doctor and talking about the sport, you're in the sport. You still box masters. You box as an amateur. To me, it always seemed like a boxer had to have a certain, their mindset was different than every other athlete, because you get in the ring and you're getting hit. It takes a special person to get into that ring and want to actually get hit to.
Yeah, are
to
we
fight.
Wired right? That's
man.
That's what it comes down to.
You're offering me a very kind compliment, but man, I'm no better than you, and I get scared. And the cool thing about boxing is that you have to learn how to deal with that, and that's the appeal of the sport. Because especially amateur boxing, it's a fair fight, and you're going against a stranger. And man, it's sort of a trip to be able to do that. And it's a really great feeling when you've done it. Because like, oh man, I just, after that, even if you lose, which is sort of, a bum deal. But, it's like, oh man, I just did that. I can't believe I did that. I still have those experiences. I've had 20 amateur bouts. And, that's why I really like the sport. And another reason why I wrote this book, because I sort of wanted, I've had a number of experiences that I think I could share with other people that get them involved in it. You gain a lot from boxing.
That's actually something I would like to hit on, because in the aftermath of this weekend, where we had two very traumatic events in the sport of professional boxing, if people were discouraged, for instance, to bring their child to a boxing gym, much in the way that you bring your children to a boxing gym, you make some points in the book about how safe the sport of amateur boxing is, going to the extent of comparing it even to other sports, like soccer and things like that. can you speak a little bit on, is it safe? Is amateur boxing safe for people?
Yeah, amateur boxing is really safe. And I think because the sport, I mean, it is violent. And it looks, when you see it, it's like, oh, geez, why would I have my kids get involved in that at all? I mean, but because it is violent, the safeguards employed in amateur boxing really mitigate the damage that occur. The gloves you use in amateur boxing are larger, and it's, in a smaller glove you can hit harder. You have what they call standing 8 counts in amateur boxing. They don't have those in the pros anymore, but it's like a timeout. If somebody's not defending themselves, the ref can step in and give the guy a break and allow the bout to go on if appropriate. There are only 3 rounds. And 3 rounds, well, you'll get tired.
Yeah, rounds. Of course, yeah.
But it's not, you're not going as the professional ranks they refer to as, swimming in the deep waters. Yeah. You're not entering that dangerous place. So it's safe. And it bears out when the medical studies, and I put this in the book because people, knowing that I'm a psychiatrist and a physician, I'm like, well, why are you getting involved in boxing again, too? You should know better. I mean, you're a kid, you may have not, but it's safe. It's great exercise. And actually, I'm 48 years old. And in order to do something that I enjoy from a physical standpoint, it's sort of hard. I just don't want to run. I could screw up my knees. I have other patients play basketball and they tear up their ankles. Boxing is pretty safe. You don't put all this stress on your joints, and you don't have to compete. I mean, you can spar and go in there, and it engages your brain too. Which, if you like the cerebral aspects of things, as I do being a physician, I mean, there's so much to learn about boxing. It's really simple when you look at two guys hitting each other. Whoa, it's not. It's really complicated, and you can appreciate the skill level of really good guys doing something hard. So it sort of fuels itself because there's a mental cerebral aspect that is appealing that makes you want to go to the gym and learn something new.
You talk about that, about wanting to learn and basically the mental aspect of the sport. I know I've read up on some of these fighters that have become world champions, and after they're done fighting, they don't have that high anymore. They don't have that feeling of being on top, of getting in the ring. They don't have the crowd behind them. They don't have that feeling that they did when they were once world champions or when they were once getting into that ring. And so a lot of them actually start turning to drugs and turning to alcohol. A lot of them get suicidal thoughts and whatnot. And I don't know if it's more of them not having that feeling, or is it a combination of the pugilistic dementia setting in with that, getting hit so many times, and then what's the cause of that? What do you think the cause of that is?
I think it's separate. I don't think it has anything to do with any kind of brain damage. I think anybody who's, especially sort of in pro boxing, where it's typically somebody who's come up, from a difficult social environment and been placed on a stage. I mean, famously, like Mike Tyson.
Yeah.
I mean, he seems to be doing okay now, but I mean, that would be a rough thing to go through from a psychological standpoint. I wouldn't want to be like 19 or 20 years old with all that money and, attention and people telling you whatever you want to hear at that age with that maturity. So I think they're susceptible to that rather than like kind of brain damage.
Okay.
Yeah. Although you do go in to the details of what we'll call punch drunk, essentially, in the book. And it's fair to say that there are some truths to the idea that a boxer can become punch drunk over time, particularly a professional, correct?
Yeah, and it's called CTE.
Yeah.
Right now, but punch drunk was the first name. It was a doctor actually from Harvard who identified it, and it was sort of interesting. He gave it that name, but he gave other synonyms, which are like slug nutty, cutting paper dolls. It was sort of interesting, but punch drunk is what's took, and then it was called dementia pugilistica, and now it's chronic traumatic encephalopathy. It's the same condition.
Yeah.
Pro fighters are susceptible to this. It's understandable. And actually, the best and largest study was conducted in the 60s, looking at British fighters, pro fighters, and about 1 in 5 of those fighters had what we call CTE. And it's a serious occupational hazard. Pro boxing is no joke.
One of the things that you mention about CTE in particular, though, is it's difficult to diagnose in living patients. Is that fair, or is that?
You can't definitively diagnose. You diagnose it through a microscope. You look at a slice of brain. It's what we call histologic diagnosis. Same thing with Alzheimer's.
Yeah.
You have to make a definitive diagnosis. It has to be made on autopsy. But if you have somebody who has sort of like the Parkinsonian things, I mean, like Muhammad Ali has that. I mean,
Yeah.
and sort of that shuffling gait and, you know, the shakes that are associated with that, that's indicative of CTE. And, you know, sadly, it's a real risk.
You know, I talked to Sean about this, I don't know if it was last week or a couple weeks back, where the WBC is one of the sanctioning bodies is actually stepping in, and they're doing more as far as the weight cutting. So before they used to weigh in the same day of the fight. Now they go to the next, you know, the day before they do the weigh-ins, but they also do the 30-day weigh-in. They do the 7-day weigh-in to make sure that these fighters aren't dramatically cutting weight and losing that extra fluid. Because like I was telling Sean, there's a lot of fluid around that brain that they lose before they get into the fights. So now they're actually, I know in some states are allowing them to do checkups to make sure that they haven't gained more than 10 pounds the night of the fight, because of the fact that if they're gaining more than 10 pounds, then maybe they really shouldn't be fighting in that division.
Well, the WBC also introduced the weigh-ins leading up 30-day, 14-day,
the 7-day
stuff. Yeah.
Right. And basically that's to also help protect the brain because of the loss of fluids, because of dehydrating themselves so much. You know, studies show, and I'm sure that you've looked into it, that it's not the big one-punch knockout that's giving these people brain damage. It's the accumulation of punches. You know, over this past weekend, you had Zab Judah that went 11 rounds before they stopped it, and he got
TKO. He
got
stopped
punished
on his
every
feet.
round. Yeah, he stopped on his feet.
They said he took 300 plus head punches in that fight. Yeah,
and that's where the bleeding on the brain occurs. It doesn't happen with these big one-punch knockouts.
Yeah.
It's the accumulation, and it's just
this is the argument for boxing safety versus MMA, right? So it's the same thing. People will say MMA is actually a safer sport because though you suffer more severe lacerations and abrasions and things like that, the basis of the sport is not someone hitting you in the head repeatedly over the course of 36 minutes. So, but yeah, it's the same kind of argument. This is actually something that I mentioned before, which is these arguments are interesting to me because we all have opinions on them. You know, for instance, last week we were talking about women's ability to fight 3-minute rounds, and there's opinions on weigh-in, same-day weigh-in, re-weigh. There's opinions on basically every major medical, or in the amateur boxing space in particular, headgear, right? Headgear. Yes. Is it appropriate to use headgear in amateur boxing? Is that better or worse for a fighter at that age? And the thing that I find the most interesting about it is that, like, none of us are medical professionals.
No, it's just all,
like, yeah, it's all just us. Just we're basically just making this stuff up here. Yeah. Like so,
I know the WBC. They work hand in hand with the team out of UCLA. They do a lot of studies there at UCLA, a lot of medical studies at UCLA. I think they're one of the sanctioning bodies that has done the most as far as trying to help the fighters and the safety of fighters. They implemented the 4th rope. They went from 15 rounds to 12 rounds in championship fights. You know, they're doing all these medical studies now as far as the weigh-in. So they really are trying to do what's best for the fighters.
Sure. And this is kind of the conversation we actually had after the show on Saturday. And this is relevant actually to your book as well, which is that there's a line where we're trying to be safe for the fighters, but the opposite end of the spectrum is, well, boxing just plainly isn't safe, so why don't we just not do it? And it turns out that, you know, a lot of medical professionals have this opinion, like it's stated in the book, right? Yeah, that's not an uncommon belief amongst, I guess, in the medical space.
Yeah, I mean, and that's expected. Any physician, at least organization standpoint, has to warn the public about health risks. That's sort of aim of any medical organization. The AMA, the American Medical Association, has a long-standing position paper against professional boxing. The interesting thing about that is that the American Pediatric Association, along with their Canadian counterpart, has a position paper that came out in 2011 against amateur boxing.
Oh, really?
Yeah, which is somewhat odd because amateur boxing, you don't have those injuries that you have in pro. You don't have anybody becoming punch drunk from amateur boxing. No. You don't. I mean, there are fatalities in amateur boxing. They're extremely rare. And so that was sort of interesting. I addressed it in the book, and we were talking about this a little bit earlier before the show. boxing is just inherently violent, and I think there's a concern about intent that sort of colors the sport because, amateur boxing is safe. There's all these safeguards that are used, and you really don't get hurt. I mean, you get some cuts, a bloody nose and things along those lines. The damage is more emotional than anything or embarrassment. But I think from the outsider, and if you're not involved in the sport, you just look, well, God, these people are being trained to punch somebody hard, and that's true. But when you have, my experience, boxing and knowing the sport a little bit more on a different level, because I've been in the ring, you realize that, well, the other guy can hit me too. And that's what makes boxing challenging because, you can't just, it's not a punching bag. It's another person who's moving out of the way, who's also hitting you, and who's just as alert as you are. And you feel them.
I think something that's interesting there, you mentioned the emotional stress of it. So you say, what you feel is more emotional. I think a loss in boxing, and this is just me making a logical statement, not really based on any research, but if you lose in basketball, your basketball team loses. If you lose in football, your football team loses. If you take a loss in boxing, you pretty much carry that entirely on your own. You're the only two participants in the ring. Psychologically, it seems like perhaps the emotional aspects of losing are different than other major sports, particularly team sports. But, boxing and MMA seem like they may stand out in that way, having to shoulder that entire burden. So that would be another interesting thing to evaluate, the emotional part of it. But
well, it develops character. I think that's what you're describing.
Yeah, that's true.
You can't put it off on anybody else, and you have to take ownership of it. By the way, which is no fun. It's no fun to lose.
I will say the heavyweight champion, Anthony Joshua, all the things that you were talking about with the panic attack and the damage during sparring and all these different things, none of those things have come from Anthony Joshua, Eddie Hearn, or his camp.
None.
Anthony Joshua has been given every opportunity by the media to make up any excuse he wants for losing to Andy Ruiz, and he simply has not done it. He's just taken it on the chin and said, no, I just lost to a better fighter on that night. What do you think about that? Why are we making up excuses for him? How come he couldn't just lose to Andy Ruiz? Is it that weird?
I think they're making up excuses right away to make the fight bigger. To me, it's basically let's use this as an excuse. So, he wasn't ready. He had a panic attack. He'll be ready this time. This time he's gonna get his revenge. And with him coming out and saying, "Hey, he just beat me." Well, what fun is that? What fun is it? Well, he just beat me, so let's rematch. Maybe this time I can beat him. But if there's an excuse behind it, he had a panic
people
attack.
Reaching. Hey, people they're grasping for straws at this point.
Yeah, exactly.
They're like, AJ lost. I got to find a reason.
Yeah, there's a reason.
The universe has to present a reason for me.
Exactly, man. The bullshit sells. Seriously, it does. I'm not gonna.
The universe has to make this right.
It's a better story. It's gonna make for a better storyline when the rematch comes around. Well, because of this and this.
But he's not gonna sell it. He's not gonna pitch that nonsense.
Oh no,
it's all boxing fans, man.
Exactly.
It's all AJ fans. Stop it, guys. Stop it. Give it up.
Yeah.
Give it up. Are you a boxing fan, Doctor? Would you say?
Yeah. I like going to the shows. I like it live. I like boxing and hockey. I like going because you get to appreciate it a little bit better than watching it on TV. So I go with some of my friends. I saw Lomachenko fight here in Los Angeles, and you get a better appreciation for what he is and what he does. You see him on TV, and you don't get to see him going around the ring and see what a pressure fighter he is, and how crazy combinations he has, and what balance he has. And when you see it live, you get to really appreciate that, and you're like, oh man. And then you also realize you get to hear the punches, and these are real people. It's not a video game. And so, I enjoy going, especially live boxing.
Are you a fan, Stax?
Of boxing?
Yeah. You like boxing a little bit?
Just a little bit.
Just
man.
a little bit?
Just a little bit. Yeah.
I couldn't tell. I didn't know.
No.
Oh, man. Did you watch Triple G?
I did. Age is catching up with the man.
You think so?
He looked a little slower. He looked a little sluggish. He got hit a few more times than I would have liked him to get hit.
How many times would you have liked him to get hit, just out of curiosity?
No, and what I'm saying is, of course, it's going to happen. It's boxing, and he's going to get hit. But, Stevie Rolls kind of popped him a few times when he should have been moving that head. His head movement didn't look too good, man. There's some of those shots that I think 2 or 3 years ago that he wouldn't have got hit with, as far as his balance and whatnot. But it just seems like
I don't know that he ever had exceptional head movement. I mean, if you
No,
look,
but
you look at it,
I'm
like
not
he
saying
just
it
kind
was.
of takes
I'm not
the punch.
saying it was
He
exceptional,
just takes the shots.
but it just
you
seems
know,
like he's slowing down, man. He still seemed about a step slow, and his power's still there because, of course, that's the last thing that goes in somebody's their power. But
catch weight though too, right? He was heavier than usual, 164.
164.
Yeah, he didn't come all the way down.
Yeah, but I don't see him. They have that trilogy with Canelo, man, and I've always been a G fan. I've never really been a Canelo fan, but it just seems like Canelo's peaking. He continues to get better, and I think they fight again. It'll be even more widespread than the last fight.
Yeah, so spoiler alert for those of you who didn't know.
Just saying.
But
man. I mean,
Triple G
that's-
won by 4th round KO last night.
Yeah, so how's that a spoiler? If they didn't watch it, that's their fault.
Yeah,
man.
you,
It's not.
you
It's
shouldn't
not like
watch
a
the show if you didn't watch boxing last
It's not
night.
like
by
a
the way.
movie. It's not like a movie. You
Yeah,
know,
I know.
Where
I don't have to put the disclaimer out there.
no, man.
Yeah.
If they're boxing fans, they should have watched it. If they didn't, if they're a fan,
You
and
don't,
claim
you don't
they-
even watch them all. You come here half the time and haven't seen the fight yet.
That's all right though, man. But I'm not complaining about a spoiler because I find out who won.
That's true. You do find out
Yeah,
who
I
won. You
find
watch
out.
the highlights.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Did you watch the top rank one?
No,
Valdez?
No.
Oscar Valdez?
No, I didn't.
You didn't watch it?
no. I was at a barbecue, so
Was it good?
no, it actually was, man. It was pretty good. Pretty good.
What'd you have?
I had some ribs and some chicken and some tri-tip,
That does sound good.
pasta salad, some ceviche, chocolate cake, a couple beers. What else?
That's a lot of stuff. You let him have all that? Aren't you supposed to be watching him? No, you're not supposed to be watching. I thought
Man, I was doing good too. I sat down and said, you know what, my diet's out the window today.
today my diet's out the window.
Yeah, I had
the
a-
famous last words of everybody on a diet.
Yeah,
Today my diet's out the window.
It's done. It's done.
Oh man,
I'll make up for it on the treadmill tomorrow night, man.
jeez. I'm not even gonna address it.
Huffing and puffing and crying in my garage.
Yeah, I believe it. I believe it. So let me ask you, Doctor, did this give you the bug? So, meaning, are you interested in writing more about the sport of boxing, or is it something where this was just weighing on your mind and had to get this off of your chest?
Maybe the latter, because it's such a unique. It's a niche book.
Sure.
and it's such a unique way to present it because it's not based on any other book. Typically, books addressing like mental aspects of sports, they usually deal with like the champions. Michael Jordan, what does he do, and particular things. I took it from like a scientific standpoint, and this is going to affect sort of everybody, sort of the emotions you feel. If you have a bout schedule, and again, focusing on amateur boxing. I had a guy who's an amateur boxer and a writer read it, and it was sort of interesting. He read, well, God, you reminded me when I was boxing, and that was a really nice compliment and sort of the goal of the book. And then also, if people have any curiosity about the sport and are concerned maybe about medical aspects, this book will hopefully alleviate those concerns and fuel that curiosity so they do it, because you can gain a lot from the sport.
I think something that's interesting that you mentioned, though, is that everybody can learn a little bit something from this book, but at the same time, the way that anticipatory anxiety or fear affect you is very much an individual thing. So each person can experience that a little bit differently than the next person. So the goal, is it fair to say that the goal of the book is just to find that it's relatable, that we all sort of experience this in a way?
Exactly. Because I think you can look at it and it's like, well, God, look at these guys doing it. They look so calm, man. I couldn't do that. And it could be, that in itself can be intimidating. But what they don't know is that these people have been doing this for a long time and they've learned. Anybody, and again, you mentioned the pro fighters saying they're never scared and stuff like that. The first time they stepped in the ring, they were.
Yeah.
Everybody is. That's normal. And everybody who's involved in boxing, like your coaches, know that it's normal too. So it's a really good for other people, at least the reader, to understand that's normal, and also understand if you go to a boxing gym, they can be intimidating in themselves. You see all these guys in great shape, really working hard, but they all started, at square one, and they were scared, and they had the encouragement to continue.
What about the character that it builds up? I know for me, for instance, I've seen a lot of these kids that have started boxing 6, 7, 8 years old, and have continued through their careers, where now they're entering from amateurs to professional. And a lot of these guys that I meet, they're wise beyond their years. They're not like your normal teenagers. Seriously, I mean, a lot of them are very humble. A lot of them have just great character about them. From Joseph Landeros to Michael Dutchover to Ruben Torres, some of these kids that we meet, they're on a different level than your average teenager out there. What type of character for you does the amateur boxing build up?
Well, yeah, I think it's just inherent to the sport. You mentioned humility. I mean, it's humbling to go in when you first go and go against somebody who's better than you. Because when you learn how to box, and if you learn correctly, you're not going to be, as a beginner, tossed in with another beginner just because they flail at each other. You're going to go against somebody who's good. And they're going to be cool, and they're going to give you encouragement. And it's sort of humbling to go through that. And it's sort of humbling the physical aspects. Because when you first start boxing, and I revisited this, I had to go through all this stuff because it's been 20 years since I stepped in the ring when I got back into masters boxing. And man, I remember just biting on the mouthpiece and you're not breathing because I was so jacked up. And it was just like, oh man, I have to calm down and go through this whole process again. And it's sort of humbling to go through that because you realize you're not in a movie, you're not being the hero. But if you go through that and you learn, you gain a lot of respect and humility for other people who've done it. I think that develops that character. It's sort of a cool process. And there's another aspect that you develop some empathy for others too when you go through this, because when you first box and you start competing, again, an amateur, unless they're at the high level and they know the guys because they've seen them in other tournaments, but it's a stranger and stuff. But when you've actually gone through that and gone through a real tough bout, you're buddies. It's not like, well, hey, I just did this. We just did this. And this was hard. And you learn empathy for somebody else. It's just not about you. It's about somebody else. Too.
Yeah. And you mentioned that manifests itself, right? Because you could see at the end of professional or amateur boxing contest, the end with the hug, the glove touch, like everybody acknowledging that, like, we just went through this thing together, essentially.
Because it's over.
Yeah, that's it.
I mean, and you have an appreciation right then and there that it's over. And, oh, heck, you both did it. Which is cool. It's a cool feeling. I can say that it's sort of it allows you to keep it develops into a niche to box. It really does.
I will say I read through the book, and you're describing the experience of the novice participating with someone who is, more senior, I guess, or advanced in terms of boxing technique, and the idea of being corrected. You had a different term for it, but I don't recall exactly what it was. But essentially. So if you start going a little bit too hard, essentially.
Well, what you can get lulled into some hubris. You think you're better than you are because you're in the ring with a pro or something like that, and he's just playing. And people are watching. You're with the pro. I know this happened to me.
Yeah.
And I got jacked. I got corrected.
Yeah, you get corrected.
You
got to come corrected.
So as far as amateur boxing is concerned, there's still a lot of questions on what's going to happen heading into the 2020 Olympics in Japan. I'd say 8 to 10 years ago, though, the AIBA, which is the International Boxing Association that's over the amateurs, started changing the rules for amateur boxing. They got rid of the headgear, and then they also started allowing professionals to fight. I think it was 25 professional fights or less. They could still qualify for the Olympics. What is your take on that? I know what my opinion is, and basically I didn't agree with it. I didn't think it was good for these professionals to come back and fight. One of my arguments is you have a 18 or 19-year-old that's been training as an amateur his whole career. Now he's having to fight without headgear. But say you have somebody like Triple G that didn't win the gold for Kazakhstan, and now he wants to go back and win the gold for his country. Now you got an 18-year-old or 19-year-old kid in with somebody like G. To me, it doesn't make sense. It's not fair to these kids that grew up fighting other amateurs, other talent at that level or near their level. If they're at that top level of competition, now having to go up against, somebody that's a professional. What's your take?
Yeah, I addressed this in the book briefly because those actions blur the line and the distinction between amateur and professional boxing. Headgear is primarily used to protect cuts, and that's real important in amateur boxing because, you can get a headbutt, you can get a cut incidentally, and you could beat the guy. But if you have a cut, you can't box the next day. You're done. And the other guy gets to go, or you're out of that opportunity. So that's why headgear is real important in amateur boxing. Having pros in it's just not fair. They're professionals, and those guys, that's their job. Amateur boxing, when I was doing it, for example, in medical school, I knew I wasn't going to go pro or not even close because I get to see what those guys do. But it was just a sport. You take the sport out of it and make it an occupation when you blur those lines.
I think something that's interesting and that you've touched on a few times is whether it's amateur or professional boxing, there's an element of calm that is needed to participate at the highest levels. And you go through in your book and you actually explain some of what you might see from a novice boxer in a gym and a professional boxer in the gym, and talk about levels of calm. And this I got a kick out of. But you're describing watching a professional boxer hit tape. Do you recall this part?
Yeah.
Hit a piece of tape in the book.
Yeah, I remember explicitly. He did it the whole time I was at the gym, which is about 90 minutes. And he was doing it really methodically. What it was, I didn't explain this in the book because it's pretty violent. So the guy's chin, his opponent's chin for the upcoming bout. In professional boxing, he knows who he's boxing. So that's what he was doing. And so he was concentrating on this guy's chin, and he was concentrating on different combinations and what he was doing. He did it for probably more than 90 minutes, but 3 minutes on, and then at that time we had 30-second rest, and he just kept on doing it. It was really interesting. It was really methodical and the reason he was doing it, I explained the science behind it, because he didn't want to think that much when he's in the ring. He just wants to let his hands go and do it correctly at the right distance, the right height, with somebody who's moving. In order to do that, you have to practice. Compared to like when you see somebody who's just coming out to the boxing gym, and by the way, I've done this too. I've tried to show off, and so I'm guilty of this.
Drilling the heavy bag.
Yeah, and there's people watching, and and then but when you've seen a novice do it, they do it real spastic, fashion. A lot different than like the top-notch amateurs and the professional boxers who are fluid because they've learned how to do it correctly. And it's just interesting to see that from a physical standpoint and know it's the mental training that led to them to that stage.
So if we're thinking about, so your kids, are they in boxing now?
No, they did it for a little bit. They decided not to do it. Because I've done it. It's something you can't push a kid into. They have to want to do it.
Yeah, I can totally understand
so
that. But you gave an opportunity at it, and they spent a little bit of time doing it.
They've sparred. I was a proud dad, because they have to go against the kid. It made me real proud to see them overcome that kind of fear and do it. But as far as competing, and they realize that when they see other amateur kids and they've gone to some other gyms and seen the workout these guys have to do, and they're like, oh, it's
a commitment.
It's a commitment. If you want to do it well, and you have to spend a lot of time at it.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've seen that actually with some of the high-level amateurs who've come on the show. Even to the extent of children being homeschooled just so that they can participate in amateur boxing more and stuff. So at the highest level, there's certainly a level of dedication beyond just hitting the gym before and after school. You know what I mean? What do you think, Stax?
I'm just thinking about what he's saying, about the mental aspects. Just what's going through my mind, though, is you mentally prepare for a fight, right? You get prepared, you watch the videos, what's going to happen. And this is in the professional level, of course, not the amateur level. But then you get into that fight, and the fighter doesn't fight the way you're expecting him to. Okay? If you're training for somebody that's going to be aggressive, somebody that's going to be coming forward, and you're practicing your counter punching, you're practicing your boxing, and then this guy's just staying away from you. And now you're having to change your style, change your attack. You come in and start attacking. He's countering you. Your whole game plan's out the window. I wonder mentally what goes through a fighter's mind when that happens. You spend an 8-week camp mentally preparing, physically preparing for a certain style, and look at, he comes out, he's fighting southpaw. He's not coming forward. He's just doing everything the complete opposite of what you trained for. That's basically what's going through my mind right now. Is I'm just thinking about, as far as like the mental aspect goes, what happens there to a fighter.
I addressed that in the book. It's called ringcraft, when you have to solve a problem when you're in the midst of the problem, and that's the sort of the apex of boxing smart for boxers. And it's real interesting. There's no science to that. Like you can have science for boxing techniques, learning how to throw combinations, throwing the punches at the right distance. You can have boxing strategy, which is the plan of action. But when you're in the midst of it and you're getting hit and what you planned on doing isn't working, you have to switch that up. You have to think things, and it takes a lot of intelligence to do that. And I make an analogy in the book about ring craft. It's really an art because when that happens, there's no instruction manual to follow. What you have to do is figure it out for yourself, or you have your corner figure it out with you. And you have to make these changes. Like I mentioned, Terence Crawford, when I see him doing it, he has such good ring craft. It's just, I'm just amazed when I watch this guy because he just figures the guy out. And that takes a lot of intelligence, a lot of skill, and takes a lot of experience. And the analogy I make in the book, it's like what doctors do. When you go to medical school, you learn the science, you learn about the vocabulary of the body, you learn about diseases. And then you go through your training as an intern or resident, you follow attending physicians, you watch what they do. It's sort of like boxers when they sort of, the sparring sessions for the physicians are your training. You watch other physicians do what they do. And then you get out in the real world and you have to do your job. You have to care for patients, and it's based on you. You're the doctor now. And you're going to encounter a patient which you don't figure out. And what do you do to make this patient become healthy? How do you guide him to health? You step back, you reevaluate what you're doing, you get consultations with others, and you try to figure out what makes that person him. And the same thing that goes in boxing. It's an art. And it's called the art of medicine. It's sort of the art of ring craft. So you bring up a really good point. From a mental standpoint, that aspect of boxing is so hard. And I can appreciate that being a spectator. When a boxer is able to do that, figure out another guy, it blows my mind. It's really impressive.
Yeah, I've actually said a few times that there are particular individuals who I think are true craftsmen in the sense that they have something just a little bit different. They have something extra. And the people who are like your Floyd Mayweathers, the Andre Wards, the Terence Crawfords of the world, it's not another gear because it's not like they're taking their body physically to another level, but you can see where they experience problems in the early going, and then you can watch that transform over the course of the fight, where through the second half of the fight, they're just creating more and more distance. So something that looked difficult suddenly begins to look easier, and it's just an element that I think very few people possess.
And then there's times where these fighters have to train a certain way, and it's not the style that they're used to fighting. They're used to being the bigger, stronger guy in the ring, and now they're fighting somebody that's actually stronger than them, that's going to hurt them, and they have to develop a style that's different than what they're used to fighting. I'm going to go back to the Adam Lopez fight. Adam Lopez is a tough kid. He's a kid out of Glendale. He's only got one loss. A tough fighter, come forward boxer. He's always been the stronger opponent. This fight, Buddy McGirt was telling him, stay back and box him, which he did for 2 rounds. The third round, he decided, I'm gonna get in there and engage with them.
Yeah.
Gets put on his ass, gets dropped pretty hard, gets up, and goes back to the game plan, which was set to begin with. Stay away from him, box, use your speed. This guy doesn't know how to box. You do. Stay on the outside and box him, and it came back to work, and he actually ended up winning by a stoppage in the 7th round. But it's just like, to be able to change, to be able to have that mental aspect to change, to be used to being the bigger guy, the stronger guy, and guess what? You're not this time. Now you got to change up your whole game plan and actually listen to what your coach is telling you. It's
mental strength.
It's mental strength, yeah.
You have to be calm to do that too. You can't be I mentioned the book about being angry and stuff like that. I think that's sort of, people think of anger and super strength and stuff like that. To be a really good boxer, you can't be angry. You have to be calm because you have to have the mental strength to be honest about yourself, what's working, what's not, and make these kind of changes.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
What do you think, man?
Man, this is interesting. It's
a unique perspective for sure.
Yeah,
I
think
think
different than what we're used to talking about on the program.
Yeah, so we have had, I would say, young and talented professionals from all different aspects of the sport, from fighters to officials, members of the sanctioning body, different things like that.
Cut men,
nutritionists, strength and conditioning coaches. But this is our first opportunity to get to interview someone who is a doctor. But it's even more unique than that in the sense that you're actually a practicing fighter as well in some aspects. So I really do want to say thank you, and I want to plug your book one more time. Amateur Boxing, Mental Strength by Dr. Nathan Lavid. And it's available on Amazon.
Yeah, and Barnes & Noble.
Barnes & Noble, wherever.
You could check it out at a library if you like.
Okay.
Yeah, if you're a parent, you know, and you're watching in and you got kids that are fighting in the amateur, or if you're an amateur boxer that's tuned in today, make sure to read this book. It's a great read. It'll give you a lot of good insight on the sport, you know, as far as dealing with your emotions, as far as dealing with stress, as far as the sport goes. I mean, it's a good read.
And I think
plus you're actually reading.
Yeah.
So I mean,
and one thing, like I said, is more than anything else, I think it'll help you understand that you're certainly not alone in the experience that you're having when you're going through this, particularly as a new amateur or someone who's early in the competition state or sparring even. The understanding just that whether or not people say as much, they can relate to this experience and you can relate to them.
Cool. Well, thank you.
you know, this week, Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, I'll be helping out with the World Boxing Council. We have a big amateur show coming up at the South Almonte High School. We'd love to have you out there. We got the president of the WBC, Mauricio Suleiman, will be flying in. We have a number of fighters coming in. We have Mikey Garcia will be there. Julio Cesar Chavez will be there. Sugar Shane Mosley, Joseph Diaz, a bunch of young up-and-coming fighters. Michael Dutchover, Ruben Torres, the babyface assassin, Danny Romano will be there. Joseph Landeros, and the list goes on and on. We have at least 30 fighters that'll be there. But we'd love to have you come out, man, and join us if you have time.
Thank you. Yes.
Thursday night it starts at 6, Friday night at 6, and then Saturday afternoon it's like from 1 to 6. So, you know, it's a big 3-day event that we're going to be doing at the South Almonte High School. So
awesome.
We'd love to have you guys out there.
Cool. I appreciate that.
And for fans listening in, we'd love to have you guys out there as well. It's free. It's a family event. It's a free show. So, you know, we got some good fights lined up. I know we just lined up a fight between Heaven Garcia. She'll be fighting against one of the top female fighters in the United States from Phoenix, Arizona. So she'll be getting in the ring that day. So it's a very good show that we're going to be putting on.
All right, man. What else?
Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame.
There we go. I knew you.
Had to plug the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame. We finally got a home. The Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame does have a home now. Make sure to go to the Instagram. We're going to be opening up a live exhibit booth in Las Vegas, June 22nd. I have all the details on the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame website, on the Nevada Boxing Hall of Fame social media. So follow us on Twitter, follow us on Facebook, and also follow us on Instagram. We are also going to be giving away that Jesse Vargas signed autograph glove today. I'll be picking a winner for that as well. Can
I sign up for that?
Yeah, you got about another 10 or 15 minutes, I think, and then we're going to be picking a winner for that.
Because if I win it, I have to give it back. People say it was foul play. You know,
I'll just give you an autograph, Jesse Vargas glove.
Sounds good.
So, well, thank you, Doc. Thank you for being here.
I'm going to write down all your plugs for you so you don't forget any in the future.
Oh, and Supreme Boxing as well.
Yeah, exactly. Supreme Boxing.
I have so many social medias that I run now.
Too much, man.
Exactly, man.
Why don't you run the social media for this? What am I doing here?
And I got my full-time job that I have to do with the Department of Veterans Affairs. So if any veterans are watching in, thank you for your guys' service.
Oh, man. And, of course, you can follow me at Beat the Count on Facebook, at Beat the Count on Instagram, and you can follow Beat the Count, a boxing podcast, on virtually every podcast platform that is out there. I appreciate you guys. Is that it for today?
That's it, man.
Doctor?
Oh, thank you so much. I very much appreciate you guys allowing me to be on here.
Of course, we are happy to have you, and thank you so much for sharing your book with us. I'm sure Stax will go through and give it a read now.
Oh, for sure, definitely. I'll read it at work.
Oh, man.
Should have did it last week, but hey, you know, it's okay.
Last week. Oh, cool. I forgot. You could stop it. Thanks. Peace.